right? Smoking is like walking up a ladder, right? Whereas like eating an edible is like jumping into a pool. Like you're in.
Hello, OneSunnyDay.com podcast. Today, my guest is Eric Williams, creator of Burlington High Society, which you can get in contact with on Twitter at Burlington420. Hello, Eric, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg.
Nice to talk to you. Today, we're going to talk about, do sort of like a zero to hero special on cannabis. And the idea behind this is to take someone who sort of came from the moon and knows nothing about cannabis, and by the end have, let's just say above average knowledge of cannabis and what it's about. I think a lot of people, this is sort of a new thing in their environment and a new thing that they can partake or not partake in. And that's why I think that for everyone, answering some questions would be a good idea. So start off with, and this sounds basic, but let's just go through it. First of all, why do you think people are involved with cannabis in the first place? What are people getting out of it?
Your smallest entry fee, right? Like sort of like a single dose, like $5 or $10 is going to be enough for a person. And then, the thing with cannabis is that makes it so much different than alcohol is that the experiences are so different depending on the strains. So like, if you go to the liquor store and buy like vodka or rye or whiskey, like it's essentially the same thing. Like there are certain people I've noticed that seem to get mad when they drink whiskey, but like in general, alcohol is alcohol. And from a chemistry level, it is, right? With cannabis, it's like, it just looks like two green plants, but like one can make you really sleepy. One can give you lots of energy, right? Like one can make you hungry if you've got like, so it really depends on like what you're looking for. And then it's not as sure a thing as like say buying a graphics card, right? So the experience is just still very personal, right? So that will make some people edgy, other people like, right? So, but if you found one that did, then you wouldn't be into that. So why would people want it? It's just like, I don't know, to feel relaxed, to feel happy, alternative to, to chase a buzz. Like why does anyone chase a buzz, right?
Well, so if I walked into the store right now, what would be the basic delineations of like what type I would get for what experience?
So they've got like bud tenders, right? So that's the thing that the stores have done a fairly good job with under legalization is like having a guide that can be like, what are you looking for? And then trying to direct you towards the thing that you need, right? And then if you get into like medical, then obviously that becomes like sort of deeper, whereas it's like, because the person is more knowledgeable, right? But like that's usually they have like a front person that's like making sure that you're legally able to enter the store, right? And they have like a guide who's just sort of like, do you know what you want or do you need help, right? And we're talking more pre-COVID now. Now you got to do a lot of over the phone, right, or over the internet. And then like you're looking at the information they give you is like they'll give you like what terpenes and stuff are in it, which is tied to the effects, and then the level of THC and the CBD, right? And then it's just sort of like.
Well, the difference for people coming into the market, though, is they know what a box of cereal is, right? So you can have a box of cereal and, you've experienced with that growing up. You got to realize for a whole community of people, this is a new store with a new product that wasn't offered to them before in a way that they were going to accept, right? Or, they're somebody they know is experimenting with it. And all this is a completely new series of experiences that were previously just easily dismissed with, well, that's illegal, I'm not touching that, right? So the basic fundamental system in your notion is you come in there, you get a basic product from the store to say, well, this is the kind of experience I'm looking for. They give you that, and then your own experience can vary so much that it's hard to standardize. Is that the basic idea?
Yeah, and like not that it's hard to standardize. Like it's not like, oh, this weed makes everyone sleepy, but he goes off the wall. Like you don't get that, right? But you're like, oh, it wasn't strong enough, I still couldn't sleep. Right? And maybe for some people there's no answer, or maybe for some people like I don't like things that make me sleepy. I find that kind of pointless. Like if I'm gonna get high, I want to do something usually, right? So I'm usually looking for more on the energy end. But a lot of people have stressful lives and they're just looking to cut down at the end of the day, right? So they're like, go, 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 go all day, and drinking coffee. And they come home and then like instead of having a glass of wine, they like, smoke a joint or have a couple bong hits.
See, I'm telling you, even that distribution is going to be news to a lot of people. The idea that the same the cannabis product that we're putting under this rubric of cannabis has a striation of effects depending on the person, a lot of people listening, that's going to be news to them. They're going to have the previous cliche sort of zoned out cannabis cliche in their mind, and the idea that there's a distribution of experiences in there is going to be news to them. So I mean, there's my understanding is that it breaks down into two main classification types. I don't know the names of the types, but that one sort of is the family that produces more sort of adrenaline experience, and the other more calming experiences, right?
So if you look, the way I heard it explained that I thought made perfect sense, I can't remember who said it, but see somewhere on Twitter. But it was sort of like, the divide you're talking about, right, is sort of like indica hybrid sativa, except by now there's been so much experimentation and kind of crossing of genetics that it's like almost everything is a hybrid. So then it becomes like the weighting of it, right? So he's like, that's basic math, right? But the terpenes are like calculus, right? If you're trying to kind of define the experience, right? And so then you find like I'm totally spacing on. I should have set up the screen too here. I could pull this up, but there's like, I think there's like 8 or 12, right? And then the combinations in different ones significantly shape the experience. And then the sort of the triangle of THC, CBD, and the terpene profile creates like a cohesive thing known as the entourage effect. And then that's the thing you're talking about, where it's sort of like the whole is more than the sum of the parts, right? How the different effects, that's like your entourage effect, right? And then it's like, then I think it just becomes personal. Like, what do you like, Like for me, I like variety, right? Like, so the one thing that sucks about home grow is that you make a whole bunch of one thing, and then it's like, there's only one thing, right? And it's also like, if it's not great, then it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's easy to grow, but it's hard to grow great, And then, but other people like, don't seem to care. Like weed is weed still. Right. And I think that will change over time, but it all depends on like what you want out of it. Like if you just want kind of a buzz to feel different, then you're probably going to find that in whatever, right? If you're looking for like I'm out hiking in a park and I want to kind of like enjoy nature a little more, then that's going to be different than the one that like, I want to like sit on the couch and play video games.
Right. So and that'll be another whole field of questions. So let's say there's a person and they're interested in this whole home grow aspect. Well, how would one get started with that? How would one do it? And what's the output they're going to get at the end?
So ideally, you'd find a friend with seeds that already had a plant that you liked what they had, and then you just get one of those. There's lots of people. So there's sort of like a gray market and then the legal market. I think right now the legal market is ridiculously overpriced for what you get for a couple of seeds, but people can freely give seeds to each other, right? Or plants even, like clones. So, and clones are really easy to make. I think for a lot of people, they end up growing out of clones. Like if Home Depot were selling weed clones, they'd sell like hotcakes, right? Like Home Depot could easily sell like 1,000 weed clones in a weekend if they were allowed to do that. So, cloning is like where you take it works with basically any plant, right? But you cut off a branch of the plant and then you plant it in like a little cube with like some kind of hormone in it, rooting hormone, I believe it's called. Anyways, and then it just grows into a new plant. And so sometimes the clone plants don't often have quite as strong a stalk as one grown out of a seed, but in general, it's like super easy. So a lot of people do it. And then if you're just thinking about like if a person just had one plant on the grow that they liked, it would be like, say over the course of like a year or two, if you just kept cloning the same plant rather than growing a new one from a seed, because you're only allowed to have 4 at once, that kind of thing, then you'd end up with more.
Right. So if you're trying to grow, because obviously it's Canada, there's winter. When do you plant these things? When are they available? How long before they're harvestable?
There's a huge range. Like you got to look up the strain, right? And then there's like 2 big considerations are if you go from the seed route, right, is whether the seeds are feminized, which is like whether the plant will grow up into a female plant, because the male plants are no good for getting weed. And if you have a mixture of them, then they'll make seeds, and then you won't get any weed that way either. Any like THC content is what I'm referring to. You'll still get weed, right? It just won't be like good consumable weed, right? So you get rid of all the males as you go, but some seeds are set that they automatically go female plants. That problem solved. The second thing, like if a person's growing inside like a grow tent, typically the way people do it is they'll run light for 24 hours during the vegetative phase, and then switch it to like 12 light, 12 dark in the to induce flowering, right? If you're going outside, then you're kind of tied to how the sun's moving, right? And then, but you can also get plants which are auto flowering, which then they just flower automatically, or they're not tied to the sun. But in both cases, feminized and auto flowering, the product's slightly weaker than if you had the same strain without that.
Okay, so the plot thickens. Okay, so the first thing to know is that the seeds are preset into the male or female category, or is that's still up for grabs?
Yeah, I think that's inside the seed, the genetics of it.
Right. Okay, and then
you can get ones that are predetermined to be female, and then you'll only grow female plants, which solves like kind of a common early problem with growers. If you just took a handful of seeds and threw them in, then you need to be identify which ones are male and then get rid of them.
Right, because the male are not going to produce the THC and the other levels of compounds that you're looking for.
And they'll also they'll make the female plants grow seeds, and then they won't produce THC instead. The plant produces the I want to say pollen sacs, but that's not right. But the buds, right, that have all the content in it that you're looking for when it doesn't get fertilized.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that either. So then you also have to keep male plants away from these female plants.
They basically have no value, so you just destroy them. They have no purpose.
But if a bee pollinates this female plant from pollen that got in a male plant, then the female plant...
Then that part of it will start growing seeds, right? This is why often with outdoor, you end up with some seeds in it, right? And it's not all or nothing. It's like, incremental, right? Like you could have a plant with 2 seeds on it, right? Or you could have a plant that's all seeds. So it's like... The thing is it's like... You have to like gardening, I think, to enjoy it. Like for me, I think growing a bit of cannabis made me like it more, right? But I've never really grown anything that was like really good. So I almost always just processed it into butter or something. So it's like a game, but it's like not a great payoff. And if you're like a light smoker, like, you know what I mean? Like $50 or $100 is going to go a long way. Like your growing costs are going to approach that. And if you've got ounces and ounces of weed that you don't really want. But I also think just in terms of how we've kind of fought for this sort of liberty, that it's kind of the duty of every Canadian to kind of exercise this freedom to make sure that we don't lose it, Because if no one grew and then if no one was growing and then they're like, you know what, we're going to ban growing again at home, like, you know what I mean? Then that makes a problem. But if you have like millions of people doing it, or at least hundreds of thousands, then it's like, it's harder for them to do that, right? Like becomes an established culture, right? And like that's the thing with like cannabis culture isn't being established by the government. It already has like a grassroots thing going on that predates legalization by decades, right?
Yeah, no, I get that. I get the element of that if you have people growing it at home and that seems fine, then it's difficult for the government to come in there and say we're taking this ability away for you to grow it yourself. It's in a secondary weird state too, because this is now we've decided it's a legal crop, right? It's a legal crop. You can get it in the stores, right? Well, tomatoes are a legal crop. Nobody cares how many tomatoes I can make. I can make an infinite number of tomatoes in my backyard, right?
Well, and that's it's interesting that you mentioned that because I went to like a presentation at the library that was like, what is it was like the HRPS. So I'm not coming to criticize harshly on this, but like just that. They were, it was like basically like an open question period for senior citizens to ask questions about cannabis, right? And I was more just like kind of watching as, interested, like, what are they feeding these people who like don't know anything kind of thing, right? Though I don't understand how you can be like 80 years old and not know anything about cannabis at this point. It seems like it's sort of been a cultural entity for quite a while. But anyways, one of the things they said, because they were talking about home grow, and then it was like, he's like, well, you have to be careful if you get it from like someone's, from a friend's backyard, you don't know what you're getting. And I'm like, I was just like, would you say the same thing about like a salad made with garden tomatoes? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, it doesn't really seem a whole lot different to me.
Well, I mean, the same thing is in my backyard. I don't know that they weren't dumping PCBs in the soil just for fun, right? It's like a farmer's field.
Well, you can make a box, right? You can make a gardening box that's separate from like whatever you think might be in the ground.
My point is it's under a separate harm calculation. The reason why nobody cares about how many tomatoes I make is because it's under a category in which someone is saying, oh well, he can't effectively industrially produce tomatoes from his house. So if he wants to hobby up his house, it's fine. And then you have to run into some other rule, like I'm now effectively operating a farm, but they don't really care what I'm making on the farm, so long as now I've turned my suburban house into a farming entity, right? But they don't really care what I'm making. They care that the action is now of a farm, right? There's a tractor and a diesel fuel, and I'm clearly farming. But my point is, the cannabis still exists under a different legal rubric where we're saying, oh, 3 plants is okay, 4 plants is okay.
Not in every province either. Some provinces don't have home grow.
Right. So it's not quite a fully legalized product, in that on a normal product, to have a restriction, you have to have a theory of harm, right? You're not quite there yet with cannabis. You don't need a theory of harm. You just need we're slowly moving into this. Okay, so in review. So if you're trying to home grow, the best thing to do, in your opinion, is to get female seeds. You plant those, it grows, you get some number of seeds and then some number of flowers. Let's say I get a flower. First of all, how do I assess a flower that I'm willing to do something with, and then what do I do with it once it's flowered?
Okay, so and then like the first decision you'd make is whether you're going to say you could do indoor in a tent, or like stick in your garage in like a grow tent. They sell these like all over the place, right, in Amazon and everything. You could just throw it out in your garden and let it grow like with the seasons, kind of take your chances with weather. Or you could have it like inside in like a pot under like a lamp, right? Which would probably be the worst of the 3 choices, right? And then when you're done, you don't have to harvest it all at once. You could do it incrementally. Like you're looking for the buds to be fully formed, right? So the same way that you look up close to see the little hairs that, that determine whether it's male or female, there's these things called trichromes on the plant. When you look up at a cannabis plant really, really closely, you can actually do this with your phone. If you zoom in your phone, like just to the tiniest, smallest part of the plant, and zoom in, like mine only goes up to I think 10 times, but it was enough to see this, then you can see these little trichromes, right? And they look like little mushrooms growing all over the plant, like just infinitesimally small, right? And so basically they start off clear and then they go like milky white. And then it's interesting, as that changes, the plant changes too, like the effect of the plant as you harvest it. So it's like but it gets more potent as it converts, but it also gets more sleepy. So if you leave it too long, you'll end up with like sleepy weed, right? But like what you're looking for is like the halfway point. So when you're zooming out close and half of those little trichromes were milky white, then it would be good to go. That's what I was reading anyway. So then you could harvest that part of the plant, and then you have to dry it and then cure it.
Okay, what are those? So what are those processes?
So drying is basically, and again, like there's like up to like industrial grades, or just basically like you have like a clothesline somewhere and you hang the plant inside out of the sun and let it dry for a couple days until most of the moisture content is gone. Oh, there's also trimming. I don't know how I forgot that. Trimming is like the worst thing. I don't like trimming at all. Like if I had a buddy that would trim, and I'm not even a great grower, but it's still a pain in the butt. But if I had another friend who would like, oh, I'll trim everything for like a quarter of the crop, like done. Like that would be such an easy deal for me, right? Because it's so sticky. But some people really love it. Think of it as like a labor of love, and there's a real skill to it. So you have these fine scissors, and you're cutting off all these like little buds, like you're cutting off all the leaves on the buds to leave just the buds, right? And if you look up, say, Cannabis Cup winners, right? You can see like the winning weed from every year. And that's one reason why 70s weed, which is sort of wild and bushy, maybe like the women, compared to like today, are much more trimmed. Like trimming is much more an art now. And that's a huge part of like why it looks so different, because most of the weed then would just be untrimmed, right? So then after you trim off all these little bits, then you take it and most people put it in like in a mason jar, and you can actually get like humidifier packs, or a humidifier that will tell you the percentage of humidity inside the container. I think you want like 70. And then basically if it's too humid, you're taking the lid off and letting some out, or most people would say for the first week, open it once a day and kind of freshen the air, and then just let it sit. And in that curing process where it just sits, it really smooths out the flavor of it. And that is like, that curing process is really the difference between like okay or kind of harsh weed and like a really, really like nice smooth product.
Okay. And so is that why you're trimming the leaves off?
It definitely help. It does help with curing, and it just makes it like look nicer in appearance. And at this point, because trimmed weed is so standard in the market, like anything you buy at the store or the black market is going to come like tightly trimmed. So your weed's going to look like garbage if you're the only weed around that isn't. Right? It'll have this noticeable homegrown look, but like if you were just gonna, I think it does taste better too if you do trim it. But like if you're like, I just want to get the content out, kind of thing, right? You could skip that trimming phase or most of it. Like you got to get rid of the leaves, right? Like you can process all the leaves to kind of score out like the tiniest bit of THC, but it just doesn't worth the effort, right? But the so you're definitely getting rid of the leaves and as much of the stem as possible, right? But like the last little bits, if you're just gonna like grind it all up and make butter, you know, then it doesn't matter as much. But like it's to make a weed that you can process into food is like easier than to make something that's like a really good smokable product. I mean, obviously people grow it and can make it good, but in my experience, I haven't really found a lot of good homegrown.
Okay, right. So then I've got my trimmed bud, right? And then is that further processed, or is that now just ground up into a cigarette, rolled and
It would
on
be
from there?
cured, right? That thing I'm talking about where you trim it and then you cure it. You can trim it after curing, but it's way more crumbly, so it's way more of a pain in the butt. When the plant's wet, it's so much easier to trim. So I often was doing it at that phase, right? Like even as part of
Right.
drying, and it can be ongoing. Like it's so much work, right? Like it takes forever, and your hands get all sticky and stuff. So it's like you often just kind of grind it down in a little bit, right? Like watch an episode of The Simpsons and trim off a few, and then hang them to dry.
And then but then my question, and then once that's dried, that's now crumbled directly into like a cigarette, or what do you do with the bud?
With a cured bud, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just like a like just like you would get like you get like a little puck.
Okay, and so that's the life cycle. Now I have a plant. I've taken my buds off. Right now, what's the future of that plant? Is that done for this cycle? Will it flower again in the next
It
month,
doesn't
next
flower
year?
again, no. I actually did that experiment myself. Like I wanted to kind of see it, so I like once I'd cut it to the root, I just sort of left them out over winter to see anything would come back, and it didn't.
Is that because of the winter, or is that just because the life cycle of it
I
have
think yeah, you
another?
kill the plant by cutting it off, right? You could keep trimming it, but then eventually it's gonna like I don't actually know. I think what would happen if you just left the plant out in its natural life cycle is that it would get fertilized, and then it would make seeds, and then the plant would die, and the seeds would crumble and fall over the ground, and some animals would eat them and run around with them, and then it would make a whole bunch of newer plants. But the plant itself isn't coming back.
That's in a way the life cycle of everything, except the immortal jelly.
No, but it could be like a tree scattering acorns over like multiple years. Like there's that's it, that's a different kind of pattern than like the plant living link.
It's got the more bug like, where it like spawns once and then that creature just dies, and then it's the next generation. Okay, so that's important. So that's important to know. So off this plant, I would get some number of seeds, right? Or I could.
You wouldn't want to though if you're growing it to smoke. Essentially, if your plant created seeds, you've made a partial mistake
Okay, but how am I? Then this may sound like a stupid question to you, but where did I get seeds for the next generation? Did
from
I?
Monsanto.
Well, but did I?
No, but like that's it, right? That one guy is like you can imagine someone with a whole bunch of plants taking two of them, allowing to fertilize fully, and then just
Right.
selling all. Like that's. I mean, the other thing too is that if you think about sort of the history of prohibition, right? There's so many great strains that were either smuggled into the country or like were kept alive in some guy's basement where there may only have been like a few hundred of these seeds in the whole world, right? And then so there's this huge tank of like genetic knowledge, and only a fraction of it has made its way to the legal market. And what I was reading, I don't know how this is evolving, but when they set up a legalization in Canada, basically what it was each company was allowed a one-time bring-in of genetic material, and then after that bring-in, they could only buy genetic material from the other companies within the legal market.
So the home grow is, I get a seed, it's planted, it basically plants once. I hope they're female. It blooms. I hope it's not fertilized. It makes the bud. I cut the bud off. Then someone trims the leaves. It goes through a drying cycle. It's dried now, right?
Dry trimming here.
dry trained to cure. Okay, cured. It's then smoked, but then that whole plant that I had previously has done its bit for King and Country. It's destroyed, and if I want to go through another cycle, I need more seeds to go and plant 3 again. The only way out of that is if I took one of my plants and let it.
Or the one other thing you could have done is say at some point in the life cycle of this plant, cut off a branch, cloned it, and then that plant would be like way behind the other one. And then with that clone, that's why I say the cloning is so much more effective, because it's like you could have a new plant blooming like every 10 weeks, right?
But does the timestamp is reset, or it comes from the clone? Can I produce an infinite clone chain, or will it break down at some point?
Yeah, you can. And you could take one plant and make, as many legal, so 4 legal clones, I guess, right?
So if you the point being is if you get something that you're interested in, you can keep an endless clone chain going.
Forever, yeah.
This gets back to what you were saying previously. Now I understand it more. But practically, I have to invest at least 2 plants into the clone chain of my 4.
Oh yeah, if you're like sticking with your 4 plant thing, but you could, yeah, basically, yeah.
So it's it just strikes me immediately from this conversation. If somebody put their hands up initially before this conversation and said, "I'm limited to 4 plants," I would go, "I don't see how that's a problem. How much you're creating off these 4 plants?" But when you get into this tapestry of different tastes and different effects, you can see someone who's saying, "Listen, I'm just trying to keep 3 different things going. I'm making clones. I'm hitting 6, 7 plants. It's not that I'm trying to." Pretend that I'm a factory. It's just that I'm into home growing. These are the 3 different flavors I want for different occasions. And because of this cloning cycle, it behooves me to have a whole range of plants growing up at different rates. And if I want to do 2, 3. So the 4 does seem to me could somebody could legitimately complain about that.
Well, yeah, for sure. And it doesn't really matter, right? Like even if it was like 20, you know what I mean? Like what they're trying to do is put the squeeze in the market, right? On the black market. And so that's one of their mechanisms, right? But like, if they're going to sort of decriminalize cannabis, then throwing every person in jail who grew a plant kind of defeats the purpose, right? So 4 is their compromise. There's other technique, like if you look up the Sea of Green technique, it's basically by training the plants, you can make them grow differently, so they grow really small. So you end up with like, I've seen a setup where it was like in a refrigerator, and it was like not cold though, right? And it was like basically like the lower shelf was like clones, and then the higher shelf was like bigger but still very small plants, and they essentially had like a whole bunch of small plants growing that way. And I think the reality is that people who are into growing probably a lot of the time just make their clones anyways, right? But if you get into anyone I know has been successful at growing is like drowning in weed. And if you're not, even if you're like a regular smoker, ounces go a long way, right? If you've got like a QP or something, like it's gonna take a while, right? And frankly, I like variety, right? Like I'd way rather have 6 different cases of beer than 6 cases of the same beer.
Well, that's where the 4 plant limit could come in. So if you had an ounce, for example, how much is how? Now I realize there's different amounts, but I guess we'll go with a quote unquote new smoker. How much is an ounce?
Tons, way more than you need. Way more than you need, right? You want like a quarter or an eighth to start. Because if you don't know what the thing is, why buy so much of it? If you've never had whiskey before, are you going to go buy like a Texas Mickey as your first one? Right? It's like get like a Mickey, see if you like the product, maybe a couple Mickeys to compare, right? Oh, I don't even like vodka. Never buy it again, It just makes sense to go smaller.
Scotch is pretty compressed, though. It's all pieces of oak or sherry barrels dissolved in alcohol. So you don't maybe peaty, maybe not, but you don't get there's no Scotch that tastes like orange juice. You're not like, oh, look at this delicious orange juice.
I actually was thinking more like bourbon. You know what I mean? Like Canadian whiskey, but just as like a grouping of it, right? But like honestly, it's like. Right now, one of the big problems with the legal systems is they don't really reward you for buying large quantities anyways, for the most part, right? So like in the legacy system, often if you buy more, then it would be cheaper, right? And so then that would be your factor on maybe you end up saving $20 on a half O by getting an O instead, kind of thing, right? But like if you're a total newbie, I would say stay away from pre-rolls for sure. I've never ever had a good pre-roll.
Right. So that's when the cigarette's all rolled up for you and you're buying rolled cigarettes. So you're now back into the problem of rolling your own cigarettes, which is not trivially easy.
If you're going to become a regular smoker, get a bong. It's so much better. So much better for your lungs. So much cleaner. Better for your teeth. Smoking joints makes your teeth dirty.
Okay, well, what's the pathway with the? How do you do that? You got the you I now have this bud. Step A, B, C for the other methods.
So you could like roll a joint, which is like rolling a cigarette, right? So you grind it up and then make a joint and light it. You can have like a pipe, which they're sold all over the place, not just at the weed store. That's probably like actually the worst place to buy your weed stuff is at the places that actually sell weed. They don't seem to have like a lot of good deals that I've seen. Whereas like every variety store around here anyway sells bongs except 7-Eleven. Sorry, oh yeah, so a pipe, or then a bong is just basically like a water pipe, right? But it makes a huge difference. And what I really like is like the bong I have is like it has these pinches in the neck. So then I can like put hot water in the bottom and then ice cubes in the neck. So the hot water makes the smoke cleaner, smoother, and then the ice chills it down, so it's like easier to consume after. So it's like less harsh.
Right, you're gonna have to go through people what that procedure is, though.
It's like you're inhaling the smoke, right? Or you have to, if you want to make edibles, then you have to like convert it into butter or oil, which is like another series of steps. It isn't that hard, but it's like a whole other. It's as complicated as growing, I would say.
Okay, we're going to do that in a second, but the point is with the bong method, that is cleaning the smoke, right? The water is cleaning the smoke. The plant is still being
play. And then the other option too, which we didn't mention, is vaping. And
right.
So what vaping is like an electrical apparatus that brings up the temperature of the weed to a specific temperature, like I think around like 270, just below combustion point though, so it doesn't burn.
So the water pipe technology, we're still burning it, right? It's just going through a process of cleaning out the heavier molecules so that I'm not ingesting them in my lungs, right?
There are people actually that will hook up the vape to a bong, so they'll vape the weed and then run it through a bong cycle, which is a bit too, I think, complex for my tastes. But you can do that. That would be like the highest clean. So
the vape technology, that what you're actually smoking there is some kind of liquidized compound somebody's made.
That, right? No, there's different. So you can get a flower vaporizer, or you can get a concentrate vaporizer. The ones that you see are little pens or concentrate, but you can get like a flower vape, which is like an alternative to like a bong or joints.
Okay, and then I'm loading the crushed up buds into this directly. I've never seen such.
Horizon makes them, just like one brand. They're all right. PAX has one.
Heats that up to a combustion level, but just
no, below combustion level. So like to a less than combustion level, and then that's why it's cool.
Enough to shake the molecules loose in any case.
Right, but not to burn up the rest of it.
And then isn't there a third system in which the THC is dissolved in water and then vaporized, like as in water molecules? Just
so THC itself is not water soluble, and this, if we start talking about baking procedures, this factors a lot into kind of how you process it that way. So it's not water soluble. So say if I took a bunch of weed and threw it into like a pot of water, it would leach out green. That would be like the chlorophyll coming out of the plant. But then if I like filtered it and like took the weed back and kind of squeezed it out, I'd have like kind of cleaner, less harsh weed for baking. But like the cannabis itself wouldn't absorb into the water.
Right. It's like a repellent barrier to it.
The THC.
It can't. Well, the THC, so it can't jump out of the leaves into the water barrier. We say it's not water soluble. It's like from the molecular perspective of the molecule, it's like a gigantic wall that it doesn't want to go through. It's chemically repelled by this wall, and so it doesn't want to jump out.
So when they're making drinks, right, they're doing some kind of factory or industrial process to process the cannabis into something that is water soluble, and then putting that into drinks.
Okay, right. So then what's my even when I have this bud now, there's another series of decisions I can make on how to consume it. So how does one think about what one of these methods is best?
So again, like you get into this thing where it's like, if you're going to make your own edibles, why not just buy the edibles, right? Especially if you're just like a new person starting out, it just seems like too much hassle, right? Like, are you going to brew beer the first time that you drink it? You know what I mean? So it's just like, it just makes just as much sense to buy. Now, right now the edibles are kind of weak in the legal market, which is like a huge downside, but I do expect that will open up over time. But like if you're total noob, then like, just dip your toe in, right?
Well, I wasn't suggesting making edibles. I was suggesting how does one think of, do I want to go this vape pen route? Do I want to go the cigarette route? Do I want to try this water pipe route? What's the pro and cons of those systems?
Okay, so like I guess it depends if you live in a world where you're going to be negatively judged, right? So it's like if you're hiding it from your neighbors, then taking big bong rips on your back porch might not be the best answer, right? Then like a vape's going to, the big advantage of a vape is it's much less stinky, so it's a lot more discreet. And the pens I find have no smell at all. The ones that are concentrated, like you can barely smell someone smoking. It definitely doesn't linger in the room the way like if you smoke a joint well, right? But I still think that like cannabis, like if a person smokes a joint in a house, it will linger, but then it will go away. But like it's not the way that say if a person smokes tobacco in the house, it just sort of like infects everything. I don't find it to be that strong.
Right. Okay. So that's the thing. And then we go to the other ways in which you can sort of get these products, which is the edibles, right? So the edibles are there's like a constellation of things you can eat, which are basically normal products that you would eat, but we've just added this extra THC plus whatever assorted chemicals.
Gummies with weed, chocolate bars with weed, suckers with weed, cookies, brownies, things like that.
Now there's a different longevity once you've eaten it. Is my understanding. There's a slower.
The biggest thing with edibles, and this I think tons and tons of people have had this experience, is they eat something, they like, oh, I don't feel anything, oh, I'll have another one, and then like, and they just get like floored, right? And like you can't really do that smoking, right? Smoking is like walking up a ladder, right? Whereas like eating an edible is like jumping into a pool, like you're in, right? Like there's no you can ride it out. Like you can be like, oh, this is too much, and just sort of tell yourself like I'm gonna be fine. I'm just gonna have to run this out for like 6 or 12 hours, whatever. And they can last a long time too, right? Especially if you don't have a lot of experience with it. But that is to me the biggest difference. It's just that with edibles, there's this all or nothing aspect to it, right? Whereas with like bong hits, like, oh, like you have a couple bong rips and then you're just like, oh, I guess I'm not going to finish the bowl because I've had enough, right? You can't really do that with a chocolate bar. You're already in.
Oh, plus you're on the timetable, right? So if like this happens, then 2 hours later somebody calls you, you're like, well, I'm in this state.
Yeah, you're not going to be driving for sure longer than that. I think, what does it say, 6 in the package? But like honestly, 12. There you go, 6 and 12. And it depends on the person too, right? It can definitely go longer if you have no if you're just not used to it. Like if a person has too much edibles, I've heard of people tripping. Like tripping is a strong word, but like experience effects for like close to a day.
Well, that's a long time. And then from the smoking, the tail out is faster as well. When you stop smoking,
yeah, I'd say so. Like one of the things I like with edibles is often it works as like if you smoke some and then have the edible, and it just kind of bridges out that high a lot longer. Right? When you smoke, it's like you're going to get as high as you're going to get in like the first 15 minutes. And then there's going to be a slow...
Because we have the same thing at play where the experience from the edibles could be different too. Some would make you more sleepy. Some are more stimulant. Does that exist in the edibles as well? Or
yeah, and now like they do have... there's one form of edibles, which is essentially like an oral spray. Right, where like each spray would have like kind of a predetermined dose, so that would be more, I think, and I think it's fairly fast acting because you're just sort of like shooting it in your mouth like that, like it's just like a light liquid that you absorb. So I think that might be closer to kind of an equivalent of smoking. But like essentially, yeah, you're gonna like
from the bud with your smoking. There's the, I mean, you noted that there's been so much crossbreeding. We don't have a clear delineation between the more stimulant oriented strains and the more sort of chilling out resting oriented strains or make you sleepy, right? Does that same thing exist in the edibles?
Yeah, for sure it does, but I think there's less options.
Is that just because they're not marketing to that, or just because the process makes it more difficult to bring the differences?
No, it's just there's just way more types of flower, and then only some of them are being made into edibles. So if you look, remember we had that kind of gray market period where there was like stores all over the place. They tended to have a lot more products than the current batch of legal stores. If you look at like say how Colorado and stuff operates, then they seem to have like a much wider variety where it's almost like approaching like sort of a Denninger's of weed, if you will, right? Like Foods of the world. Because like now it's so basic and minimal and sort of like Like for me, there isn't a lot of value in buying like chocolate bars, say from like the cannabis store, the OCS. They're so weak that there's so much better value in making my own. You know.
Right. And that is there. Did anyone ever come around to establishing what the THC limits were in these products? Is this standard to a unit or to some kind of?
It's like milligrams, right? It's measured in milligrams. So milligrams of THC, and if you look online, there's calculators so that you can calculate base. If you know the potency of your weed, you can roughly calculate how strong your edibles will be. But yeah, it's measured in what is it? What is it on here?
Right. And then so you mentioned that if you come across the butter home grow, however you get that product, you can then make it into butter. What's that? What's that process there? Because then you can cook with that butter, I assume.
Yeah. So you can, and you can also use and this is my best tip for people paying attention at home is you can use coconut oil, not the liquid kind, the stuff that's sort of solid at room temperature instead of butter. And I like the taste of butter a little better, but the coconut oil is so much more flexible and useful and lasts longer.
And so what's that process?
Okay. So either oil that you're using, right? So there's a few ways of doing it. All this is laid online. You can see YouTube videos of it, all the same stuff, right? What you have to do is you take your bud. You usually need more for you have to have your if you're making it to make if you're just making butter, that's one step. If you're making it to make a recipe, then you have to have like kind of an end game of like how much sort of how potent you want your butter say to be, and then therefore how much cannabis you have to put in the butter to kind of make your dosage work like per brownie, right? But if you're just making butter and putting it on waffles or toast or whatever, then that doesn't matter anymore, right? But your process of making it is the one step that's really important is called decarboxylation, and that's basically where you take your cannabis and you put it in your oven, and you can either wrap it in tinfoil or sometimes I just put it like inside like a Corningware dish with like a lid, or even just inside a mason jar, and you set it at 240 degrees Fahrenheit for half an hour. And what that does is convert THCA into THCB, and THCA is not your body doesn't absorb it if you eat it, and THCB you do, right? So the same weed is much more potent as an edible if you do this decarboxylation step first. So that's why it's really, really important. So then you're basically making your weed butter, right? And so often in that step, it's like you can use like a double boiler where you throw in your weed and butter and mix it together. There's like you can put it inside a mason jar. In like if you're decarboxylizing in the mason jar, you could just sort of open it, throw your oil in, seal it again, set it back in. In the same way, you're sort of then cooking it longer at that same temperature to like let it intermingle, and then you filter it out, and then you've got all this like leftover weed that's soaked in butter. Like if you eat it, that will definitely get you high too, right? That's leftover. Sometimes I've thrown that into recipes before, but like just as often you just discard it. And then the step I like to do, which is not always done, and it's the one step that works much better with coconut oil than it does with regular butter, is to wash it. So then if at that point you like say with the coconut oil, I'd have like this pot full of coconut oil, right? So if I take a bunch of boiling water and mix it in, right, then it's like all the oil is going to rise to the top and the water at the bottom is going to be full of green, which is like chlorophyll, right? So if I take that and stick it in the fridge, then the oil is going to freeze on the top and I can just lift it out and discard the water, right? If the water was like totally opaque, then I might do a second step, right? Like a second wash. And at that point, you want to be fairly clear, and that makes the end butter much smoother and kind of filters out all the other plant products that you don't want to necessarily eat.
So we have to use an oil because, as discussed previously, it's not the compounds we're after is not water soluble. So that's why it has to be butter and oil, right? You can't just.
You don't have to use a solid oil, but in my experience, it's much easier.
Right. And so we stick it in the oil. We allow the THC to come out into the oil. Then you strain out, I assume just with a strainer, the bits of plant that you ground up.
Cheesecloth, you have to use cheesecloth. Coffee filters do not work.
Okay, well, there you go. You just save someone a lot of time. You strain it out. You now have your oil component. You have your leftover, partially what do you want to call it? Partially used plants in oil. You can eat that or not eat that or throw that out. You now have your to some level clarified oil or butter. You can take the oil, make it into a recipe. The problem now you have is that there's some relationship which you hope you worked right to a brownie to how much THC is actually in there. This is the Joe Rogan. There's a classic Joe Rogan. Is it Joe Rogan? Line where he comes into the store and he's talking to the guy and he says, "What about these bears?" And the guy says, he says, "Just eat the leg." And he's like, "Just the leg? Why are you selling whole bears? What are you trying to prove?" And the bit is that they had made these edibles where he was so potent that there was no sane way to just consume one of them.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah. Oh, that. I'm sorry. My head kind of was thinking of a real bear for a second, but I'm totally with you. Yeah, like the size of it. And the other thing too, like say, that's going to vary between you. So if you're much more used to cannabis, then you might pop a couple edibles, whereas like the same gummy bear, half of one would floor the other guy, right? So, and it's like I say, it's like a pool. Like once you're in, right? So it makes so much sense to kind of go in slowly if you don't know what you're getting into. But once you do, it's so easy, right? That's why gummies are great, is once you're familiar with the experience, and if you don't want to smoke, then it's like, I know exactly how far a gummy and a half is going to take me, and there it is, right? Easy, quick, and done. And it's like smoking takes time too, right? If you're a busy man,
Well, it's also it depends. You mentioned earlier you like to do something, right? It depends if you're doing something or not doing something. If you're just hanging around with a group of people in a social setting, well, that's one thing, right? But if you're like, hey, I'm going to do this, and I still have a bunch of things to do, and I want the effects of this while I'm gardening, for example, or working the barbecue or something like this.
Hanging out at Wonderland all day, right?
Right.
Like edible. Think about that. It's like, are you going to stop and get high 5 times at Wonderland, or just pop an edible and go get on some roller coasters?
That's COVID right now. You're not going to Guess Wonderland.
Oh, right. No, but we're it's gonna be over. There are going to be roller coasters in the future. I want your listeners to know that.
We'll see. The listeners in Texas already have roller coasters, so they're like,
right. I meant for us. I meant for Ontario.
Yeah, listen, in the long arc of history, there's a day, one way or another, where COVID is not an issue. It has an endpoint.
I honestly, I think the horizon is more or less in sight. I think by the time they're doing like the third round of boosters, we're gonna just it's gonna start taking a backseat. I think too at the beginning there was so much uncertainty, right? And that uncertainty pumped so much fear. And I think now it's just so much better understood that it's like, it's horrible but less scary.
Well, listen, you get horrible less scary right off the bat, because my wife, who's family is all in the States, all spread around. And then the United States did a beautiful tapestry of every possible COVID reaction for us. Mm-hmm. And just demonstrated what would happen if you did nothing, if you locked down. Like they demonstrate every possible mechanism of output, right?
Except that they're all intermingling, right?
There's some of that, but that factor is always the same. So, if you're right that if you have some cross pollination between like down, between the center of the city and the outskirts, and there's more people infected with COVID in the city, well, X of them are coming to the suburbs, and they're constantly repriming the suburbs. But the whole reason why you have this construction of there's more COVID in the city and there's less COVID in the suburbs is that the suburbs can't self-sustain the reaction, right? If it was self-sustaining, then it would just go up and up and up on a slightly less scary line than the more scary line, right? But you don't see that. Like, you don't have these self-fulfilling reactions as of yet in the country zones. Where we live, it's always the usual suspects every time. Peel, York, Toronto. Peel, York, Toronto. Right?
They're just tighter, right? They're just so much more compact,
Well, this is the thing that I'm always on about, but the public health people aren't. Is that, to me, it's the Japanese approach. So the Japanese approach was when this whole thing started, they were like, here's how you're going to get COVID. You're going to be in a tight enclosed space for a long period of time with poor ventilation. That's the magic triangle. And they made posters this magic triangle. And then somebody put their hand up and said, well, doesn't that make the subway the worst place you could be? They're like, oh yeah. And you can imagine how painful this was in a city like Seoul of sort of denigrating the subway as like, it's not great. And we just haven't, I think, had this ability to sort of sit there and go, the density is a problem. Like the bus is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, if you don't own a car, the pandemic has been such a harder track. Like just flat out, if you do not own a car, everything about this is more difficult. It's way harder to stay away from people. It's way harder to get stuff. It's just like the whole kind of classic, the urban lifestyle of like everyone living in condos and taking the GO train. Like it seems like a nightmare now.
Well, I have the sort of outlier opinion where I'm like, I said this before, is like if I was a strategic planner, I would have to sit there and think to myself, is the city just dead? Is it just dead? Is it not going to come back on a time scale or not going to come back at all? Because people, like a lot of the transit use is like, oh, we're going to encourage transit. Are we not going to encourage transit? What are we doing, right? Can we make it a more wonderful experience or cheaper or subsidize it to get people to do it? It's coaxing. But I think this can go, you can forget the coaxing. People are not going to go. They're going to say, you know what? It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Because one of two things, they, when you go into the supermarket now, you're in the supermarket, but there's lots of other people that are super freaked out, right? They're in the same place with you at different like levels of comfort, right? But the subway's always going to be like this. So when you decide, hey, I've now gotten vaccinated, low community spread, I'm comfortable with the subway, I almost guarantee there'll be people in the subway that aren't like that and are still bugged out.
I don't know. When they're vaccinated, it's like if your odds of being hospitalized are almost zero, then it's like they'll just go back to normal.
I don't know, because the problem with that. So here's where it goes back to normal. See, Texas shows you that everybody, including me, said 3 weeks ago when they said we're removing all the restrictions. It's whatever you want. We have friends down there that they've been to like full on baseball games, full on football games. Like everybody just shoulder to shoulder in and out of this place. You know what those venues are like, right? Nobody cared. I thought to myself, they're gonna spur up a fourth wave for sure, right? It's not going to be maybe as calamitous as the previous waves, but there's no way if they just take all the restrictions away, there won't be enough people left, with that haven't been vaccinated yet, because they still haven't even gotten that far down the age range. There'll be enough people to restock it. Wrong. The number just went down, and it's all of the people who said that it was going to go up, including me, were just wrong. And I think that's partially because
I wasn't following that closely. I can't really speak to about that either way.
Yeah, well, the point is that at some point what happens is that it's like the old line in I forget the movie now, but he's talking and he says Al Pacino says, you know what guilt is like? Guilt is like a bag of bricks. All you have to do is set that bag down and walk away, right? And this is the same thing. The preoccupation will exist until people go, you know what, we've done what we can. It's not 100% chance you won't. It's not 100% chance you won't get into an unfortunate incident with infectious disease, COVID version, whatever, and die. That's still on the table. But it's now so remote that your chance of getting hit by a car is 10 times, 20 times. You see what I'm saying?
I don't know where they are at capacity, but like here, like Joseph Brandt's overrun, right? So there's like, if you get in a car accident, your chance of dying is much higher now than it was a year ago. Like there's so many delayed surgeries, right? That has like a huge body count, right? Like those two factors, like every additional case that goes to the hospital is just putting more and more levers on those other people where you have like COVID causing non-COVID deaths.
Oh, that's been true. That's been true from the start. And then the problem with Joseph Brand, I don't
think we can have this high capacity though, right? Like I think this is as worse as it's ever been, as to my knowledge.
Oh, it's as worse. I know for a fact it's as worse as it's ever been, because my wife works at the hospital and goes there, and she can tell you, she can tell you straight up, it's not the time to go to the hospital. It's a disaster.
Mhm.
But there's a whole series of bizarre decision making points where, so we put a overflow capacity tent in Joseph Brandt, which they then decided in the lull between 2 and 3 they didn't need. They deconverted it from COVID patients to vaccination clinic, which is definitely not needed. I mean, the number of gyms and like there's 100 places do vaccination.
No, I'm not. I have no criticism of that kind of thing. I do think that like I think that we've made certain businesses a priority. Then those businesses should have got vaccine. Like if we're like Cargill has to stay open, Amazon has to stay open, then they should have just showed up and vaccinated the whole plant.
Well,
I don't understand that. I actually had an idea. I thought, and I know I can understand why it's politically untenable, but like if the government had set aside like say 5% of the vaccines and made like an open market for that, then like say like no one's going to give vaccines to the NHL as a priority, but like you could have 5% set aside and let all these different groups bid on them if they want them early, knowing that they'll eventually get them anyways, right? And I think that early market would have really driven acceptance of the vaccine at the same time.
Listen, I think I understand the social the same social problem that you're stating. I get, but I do think there's a weird genius to saying, you know what, actually this vaccine costs X number of $1 billion. It really costs money. It's not free, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there's some rich guy that wants to pay $10,000 to get that vaccine today,
like 3 months early, maybe, right? And then how much more space does that create for other people? Like it could be a maker. It's not going to be a huge payoff though when you math it out. Like if you're like every person paid $2,000 for like the first 5% of vaccines, like it's not. I think it's less than $1 billion.
No, I think the payoff is that instead of the government using their weird mechanical rollout, you know what I mean, where it's like this age and then there's this hot spot and there's whatever. It activates the fact that when you put people who care, right, they'll auto activate what they need to do by what makes sense for them. So they'll sit there and the companies would have automatically started to go, Rick is an expert in solar panel management, right? We can't have Rick sick for 2 weeks. We don't care about we'd like Rick to live, but the real aspect is we just don't want him sick for 2 weeks or quarantined for 2 weeks.
Or like, there's professional athletes, right? There's lots of people with like $1 million behind them, Chris Hadfield, right? It would be great. Like it's not hard to make a list of people who there might be other people who would be worth it to have that market. But like, I still like most of how the government has kind of fairly put things out and kind of not apply that pressure. So even if it was like 2% of them, right? Like enough to kind of create that thing, but like, most of the rollout is still happening on time, on schedule, right?
Well, what you're crossing is the fact is that the government, they're trying to create a thing where money doesn't matter, right? It's like in these categories, money matters, but then they create this sort of spreadsheet that says, well, did you know that COVID was disproportionately affecting people with less money? I'm like, everything affects people worse if you have less money. Your diet's worse. Everything's worse.
With this space too, right? Like that's the big, like for me last summer, it was like the big luxury. It was like I was really jealous of anyone who had a pool. Like if you could just jump in your backyard and go swimming every once, like, oh, so good, right? And that like when I've been like doing house hunting, that's all I've been looking for is like to kind of add that piece to the puzzle,
Oh, this year, you can see the squeeze on lumber. Like you can see it. People are like, well, if I'm stuck at this backyard and I'm no longer spending I don't know, $200 a night at the keg or whatever these people are doing, right? They're like, hey, I'll get a pergola and I'll make this backyard splash. And then because of that, it's what you said before, because of the fact that I'm set up with sort of financial freedom to execute what I want, right? That plays into something. Well, now I have a pool. Now I don't need to go outside as much. I have Instagram delivering my groceries. Well, you know what? Magically, my chances of getting COVID randomly just went down, right? And so,
back to the car thing, right? Like if you have your own car, now you can avoid all public transit, all those interactions, right? Grocery, like I've been doing grocery pickup the entire time, right? Now I'm at the point where it's like I miss the impulse shopping, But like a $300 shop is like a total waste of time. It's like hours, right? Like it's I can just go like click, 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 and then once you've done a few shops, you kind of get into your routine. You already know what you want. Like it's I'm just basically just going through a list of things I've already bought and adding it again. You know?
Well, I haven't done the pickup. I might look into that because I got sort of addicted to Instacart.
Well, I
Uh,
know you're a Costco guy, which I totally am not. But uh, the Fortino's service I think is excellent, and for the prices of it for the year for making the pickups free, and they give you like a 10% discount on top of PC products, like it can cover its cost in a couple months pretty easy.
well, I might go. I see. I Instacart both Fortinos and Costco through the same system, but you hit me on the Fortinos direct. The two things I find about it is that, and this is going to be a complete class divide. I think going forward. I think if you thought there was a difference between social strata before, watch when people don't have to go to the store and they don't have to be involved in their community at all. Not so much here in the suburbs, but you know,
I think people want to go out. Like, aren't you dying to go to the pub? Like, I'm dying just to sit there and eat a burger and like watch a bit of soccer or something.
I would like to do that. I don't think that that's as restrictive as, people can't come and hang out in my backyard. People can't come over and hang in my house. I find that more restrictive.
But that when they're doing that, like I thought too, when they implemented, they've had people on this narrative, and for a lot of people, they've been stringing it along almost like 2 weeks at a time. Like it's hard to believe we've gone this long, like basically 2 weeks at a time, right? But I think anyone who was really like smart about it at the beginning knew it wasn't going to be over in 2 or 4 weeks, right? Like I was certain we were still going to be dealing with this at Christmas in like March, and I was like upset about it, and kind of take time to process that. But I think when they did the massive lockdown and they closed all the playgrounds and then instantly changed their mind in 180 like the next day, like I think a lot of people were just like they don't fucking know what they're doing, and then just sort of like completely opted out of the narrative. And then if you're someone who's been say consuming nothing but conservative media or like O'Toole's Facebook feed for the last year, then you're sure this whole thing's Trudeau's fault anyways, so then it's like who's left to actually do anything productive?
Well, I read this good article which reaffirmed what I was sort of already thinking, is that previous to this, I thought to myself, is there anything they can implement that people aren't just going to accept? Because people seem to be like gleeful, right? But it strikes me the real problematic thing is what we've discovered now, is that what people really want is a series of tough sounding restrictions and travel restrictions and all these things. But if you come to the place where they can't do whatever the hell they want, then they get upset. And that's where this OPP police enforcement came in, is that somebody at some table said, people don't have any real fear of getting stopped by the police driving to their mom's house for a visit in the backyard. There's no fear there. And it's like, so what if because they have the cell phone data, right? So they can see through the cell phone data how much people are traveling around, and they come back with this mobility. Like the mobility is too high, And so the science table or whatever recommended that to Ford. And then they said, well, how can we, because they posed this 15,000 a day, complete nightmarish. I mean, it would be complete breakdown at that level. Right.
Well, triage 3 is like if you have a 70% chance, if you have less than 70% chance of surviving intubation, they allow you to die. That's really harsh, right? There's a lot of people alive right now that would not clear that threshold.
Well, I know listen, there's a whole bunch of legalistic hurdles to make that happen too. So the first legalistic
but
hurdle,
if there's no space, right? Like eventually it's just a numbers game. You're not going to be able to sue the doctor because they didn't help you because there wasn't enough space to help you. Like you're just going to die of a heart attack and get left at home.
No, the space issue is that not that the space issue is that the hospital is normally clogged with people. So
Yeah.
if you went to an average floor of the hospital and you started going through the beds and saying, which they have people employed in all the time, why are all these people in the hospital? You discover a really significant number of them don't need to be in the hospital, but there's nowhere for them to go.
I'm getting out of my depth now. I can't speak to that.
Well, I'll just come back to the point. They go to they're waiting for a long-term care bed. They're waiting for their supports at their house to be set up. They're just sitting there and waiting, right? And so they always have this 24/7 shift the bricks around to try and minimize or spread the load out across these floors, across these units, across whatever. That's going on 24/7 a day. What the ventilation thing is about is all the ventilators are taken up, and then some 18-year-old guy that randomly came down with this thing is in dire straits, and the doctors are like, this is a perfect case of someone we can save with ventilation, but all the ventilators are taken up. What are we going to do? And so they can walk back there and take someone says, listen, this person's realistically not going to survive anyway, and speed it up. And again,
I'm guessing if you're probably going to keep your tube. It's more the people not getting the tube in the first place.
It's a little bit. I think it has to be a little bit of both. I mean, as brutal as it is,
I just feel like it's just a lot to ask of people, like of the doctors and nurses kind of running this. It's like I feel like the government's been kind of insensitive about that in general.
Well, what they're not doing, which they should do, what they're not doing is doctors shouldn't be placed in this position, because what they should have is a rubric of how this is decided, point system or whatever you want to, however you want to grotesquely mechanical make it. It has to be decided, and then the system has to be deployed mechanically. Right, so that if somebody rolls up at the thing, and
you need thinking people. It's like imagine if like all our judges were robots. I don't think that would be better.
The judges. This is not the. You got to realize what this place looks like, right? When it's overloaded, the system is overloaded. So right now, I know certain places they have 2 people in the same ICU room. So they've just put 2 beds in the same ICU room, which they normally don't do. And that was one of the ways they would create extra space. As people are loaded into the system, there's different levels of care that they've already established in the hospital. And so there's normally, on a normal day, a whole bunch of people in the hospital that they would like to be in the ICU, should really be in the ICU, but there may be corner cases they're waiting for a space. Lots of people in the hospital are waiting for a space. They're waiting for radiology. They're waiting for the procedure to be done. They're waiting, right? So it's not uncommon for them to have a huge group of set of people that they would, this person should be in the ICU, but they have no spaces. So they put them in an intermediate care level where it's not quite ICU, not quite not ICU. There's more nursing. There's different things. They're not stupid. None of these people in this, one thing you can say about most of the medical settings, it's not beset by people that are stupid. The average person is pretty smart and pretty, they're not distracted.
That's how I always felt like walking into, say, Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto. It's like there's this weird energy in the place because it's so smart, right? Like there are so many smart people packed into that space, and then like in that space, it's like every day someone's having their best day and someone's having their worst day, and like that you can just feel that energy in the air. Like it's a really powerful place.
Well, it's that. Anyway, my point is, in this environment, what's happening is the doctor that would normally come and spend 15 minutes looking over your case with residents, you don't even necessarily see this, it could be outside, 15 minutes looking over with residents and then coming in and being like, okay, we're checking you out, we're having a conversation with you. Maybe that person in a normal ideal scenario, the attending's checking in once, there's a couple residents checking in through the night. You're really getting checked on 3 times for updates, right? Now, if something goes wrong, the nurse puts their hands up and calls like this, this person is a disaster, right? But that's the system in which somebody's coming in and sort of saying, we're going to change this course of care. This isn't working, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of meetings and management behind the scene. When you're in the hospital, it feels like nothing's happening. You know what I mean? Realistically, lots of stuff's happening. It's just not brought to your attention, right? And so that's normal, but you can get it to a place where whatever those standards of care are, a person checks in, those are degrading. They're probably degraded now, honestly.
When there's a huge surgery shortfall, right? Like there's been more than one doctor to say that they think that ultimately that surgery deficit will cause more deaths than COVID in Canada. I don't know. I think that'll take a couple of years probably to measure, but there's definitely been a ton of delayed surgeries.
There's been a whole series of delayed surgeries, and you get into this is the real problem. The real problem is the public health apparatus keeps trying to decide what is essential and what is not essential, right? And so they say, well, knee surgery is not essential. Well, you know what? If you can't walk around, you know what I mean, and you've been waiting 6 months for this surgery, and on statistically basis, we get these knees into X people, they're going to get more exercise. They're going to feel like doing things. They're going to be full of life. Like I remember there was a Stanford article day one back in the back in the day, and they put out this paper when there's all this lockdown. I mean, last March, it seems like eons ago. The stuff that's going on now would seem completely impossible if you told someone,
Well,
14
time is
months ago.
definitely moving at a different speed since Trump got voted out of office.
Well, that's all. But my you can go to that in a second. But my basic point is that when you have what's it? I lost my train of thought. So Stanford had this article right off the bat that 500 doctors and whatever people signed right off the bat, and they said, whatever you do, don't close the schools, don't close old age recreation places, don't do these things, because what we'll do is you'll create intergenerational collision. In that, what happens is the second you say the kids are home, the kids will get put with the grandparents. That's just what'll happen. And now you'll have these wonderful disease vectors constantly popping down from the old and the young. You'll shuffle up everybody's schedule. So instead of seeing grandpa once on the weekend, he's coming 2 times a day to look after Jimmy so the mom can,
Well, I
work
think
her
like
business.
leaving the option though for people to opt out definitely was helpful. Like for us, it wasn't a huge, it wasn't a massive burden to do it. Like it definitely shifted some things around, and I almost would prefer to be like in meat space school, so to speak. But
So, just to round the conversation back up, do you think that do you think there's been more cannabis use, more expansion because of COVID, or less?
oh, for sure, because you're just at home, man. It's like, look, I found for me at the beginning, I went through like a month and a half where I just could not have like anything sativa. Like I wanted, usually I'm all about sativas, like energy, go, go, go. But the situation just had me just stressed. And so I just wanted like just mellow flat weed. And even stuff that would normally make me sleepy, it was because I was on edge and I was kind of like finding that, that balance, right? And I remember after a 6 weeks, I can't even remember what the movie was, but I was watching a movie and smoking a sativa and just really into the movie and excited and thinking like, this is the first time I've, gotten here since like COVID started,
No, I think that I'm not in a situation in which I would say like I'm, sort of actively stressed as bad as people could be. So I'm not whining, if you're a low wage worker in Toronto and your job is gone and, you didn't qualify for CERB or anything, you're in real stress. I'm not comparing real stress with
and
what I say I'm facing.
It's like, if you're just stuck and you're like, oh, like, especially now, like I can't do anything, like say I picked up like the one thing I locked down was I bought myself for my birthday, I bought a portable disc golf basket, and I got it like 2 days before Ford did the lockdown. Right. And so it was like, it was actually 2 days after, but I'd ordered it well before. And so then it was like, I took it to the park because the way they've done it now is like, you can't, all the golf courses and disc golf courses are closed. Right. But then it's like, you can play Frisbee, you can walk in the park, you can even walk in the park where they have the disc golf. You just can't throw your Frisbee at the disc golf. But if you take your own target to the park, that's fine. So then anyways, I went to do that. And then this kid came up to talk to me, just like, it was actually like I don't know how old he was, like I think 10 or 8, but he was like a refugee from Iraq, and it was just being polite and nice, even though like it wasn't really in the mood to talk to anyone at the time. And I was there with Yen, and he's asking me all these questions about like disc golf, and it was clear as day he wanted to, throw the disc, right? And I felt like a total Scrooge, but I was like, I'm sorry, man, like any other time you see me here, like after lockdown, I'd happily give you a disc to toss, but like since we're sort of under this, like, the last thing I want to do is like and have a police encounter with my kid at the park over like throwing a Frisbee, right? It just seems like not worth it to me.
No, I think it does produce background stress, and I noted that I watched a piece of video somebody sent me. Actually, it was like a police shooting video, and I thought, okay, well, I'll review it. And so I watched, and I was like, God, the stress level in the encounter is just so high, right? And then after that, I just realized like all my normal ways to remove that stress, are gone. Going to the gym is gone. You know what I mean? And right off the bat, I could see the writing on the wall. So I bought a whole bunch of carpentry stuff. I redid a whole space in the basement to make like this whole computer almost center for the kids. I bought like a rower. I fixed up the rooms. Home renovation is, if there's a high side to or a good side to COVID, which there isn't, home renovation, you're going to see nicer basements than you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah, that's not really my bag. I'm not much of a handyman construction type, so I didn't really get to take advantage of that.
Oh, I'm not, but I know I had interest in it, but I'm like pressed into service. I'm like, what else? What else can I do? And it's more of an aspect of escape. It's something. It's like a flow state. You're working on something.
I get that totally, right? Like, you need a project to work on just to kind of get out of the vibe. Like, I've been baking a lot. I've been the last couple of months I got way into chess. I saw Queen's Gambit and I started watching a bunch of different Gotham Chess is actually an excellent YouTube channel if anyone's into chess. But I like, you know what I mean? Like, you just need things to study, right? Yeah. We're doing like, it's a great time to pick up a language. I think Skillshare is fantastic too for just sort of like, I want to learn piano or anything like that. There's some really, we're basically at the best time in history to learn something, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I think the speed is really incredible too. I mean, you really notice, hey, I'm interested in doing whatever it might be. And you're like, hey, there's no better format of learning the World Wide Web. Stage 1 is interesting, but stage 2, where I can get a video from someone who knows what they're doing and I can see it and I can see the mistakes, and it takes 10 minutes to access this, right? I mean, it's anything you want to do, video editing, music production.
And that's how I kind of feel with like we had the internet in high school, but like there is no YouTube. Right. And I'm like, that was such a, it's the mother of all teachers. Right.
Yeah. And it's not yet. Oh, by the way, I'll give you a tip somebody gave me. Have you bought YouTube Premium that takes the ads away?
I did. I actually just got rid of it like this month. I'm on my last week of it. Why?
Somebody told me, said you best money ever spent. I turned it off and I'm like, I can't go back. I can't. You go to another thing and you're like in the middle of listening how to do this thing and the ad starts and you're like, what technology is this? I can't go back.
But it's like $12 a month is kind of high, right? Like it's
I'm completely sold on it. Maybe I'm looking more things.
But I've been subscribing for years, so it's like I'm saying it's not a good product that I already am like paying for, right?
Yeah,
I was gonna try doing it, but yeah, I can. It's like I find Netflix that too. Like I'm not really wanting to get rid of Netflix, but they keep creeping up the price, right?
Yeah, I'm not listening. This is a cancer whole other thing now, but I think the value proposition of HBO is way better than Netflix. So the problem is that you don't have as easy way to buy it up here. But whenever you get apples to apples, whenever you're going to have Netflix that's $20 and HBO that's $20, you're going to go, well, hold on a second. I can watch this massive catalog of shows. You go watch The Leftovers. You'll just binge watch it from beginning to end. Just the minute you start watching it, you'll just be like, oh, this is just it's caught me. It's caught. And the characters are interesting. The thing's complicated. People put a lot of time and energy to this. The great thing about The Leftovers is that after the first 2 seasons, it was not financially viable. And the guys came to HBO and said, we can't leave the viewers hanging. Like we know the next season's not going to make money, but the people that have watched the first 2 seasons, the show's not going to end properly. And they said, yeah, we'll give you the money to do the 3rd season. And I was like, that's only because they care about the HBO brand. They want this whole, complete thing on the network that you can now go watch. The Leftovers is really creepy because it has the same vibe as COVID. It has the same apocalyptic vibe in it. Yeah. Oh, you're just like, I can't.
I find looking for way more escapism. I started going through the Avengers catalog on like Disney Plus. Like I've kind of cleared it now, but like I kind of got superheroed out like 5 or 6 years ago and just sort of stopped and was like, okay, it's been enough for a break. I can kind of go back. But looking for more escapism than like the last thing I want to hear about in my news or in my TV watching is COVID.
No, listen, that's true so we're gonna do Trump summary and then wrap out because I promised, because you made a Trump reference, I promised to come back to it. So I did watch Trump. Somebody flagged it for me. And so I did watch Trump on Fox, and that guy, he's going, he's not going off into the sunset. And the interviewer was saying, and because like the people around you that I know are like, this guy's 24/7. He plays a little more golf. That's it. And then if you listen to Trump talk, he's 100% in. He uses we now. I've never heard him sort of use, in the first thing, use we for the Democrats. He's like, we're going to take the Senate. We're going to take.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that I was watching him on this thing, and the surrogates were like, he's 24/7. He's not slapping. And then when you heard Trump talk, he had ownership. He had mental ownership over everything. He's like, we're going to take the Senate. We're going to take the House. I'm going to do what's necessary. I'll show up. I'll fundraise. He's made friends with all his Senate enemies and brought them.
What? What are you talking about? He's made friend with all his Senate enemies. He's like despised. He's despised and unwanted. Like, are you talking about Bernie Sanders? Like, who are you talking about?
No, I'm saying like, he was like Mitch McConnell. They had like a sort of falling out. And then he's like, you know what? I'm just telling you.
Mitch?
He's like, Mitch called me up and he needed help with his, fundraiser. And I went down there and I helped. Listen, this is, so how you have Biden now, and the reason why Biden is so much more powerful than a normal president is because
he's like a decent person. It's so refreshing. It's so refreshing to have just like a decent human being in the White House. I love it.
That's not what get things done. That's great. I'm not despising being a decent person. I'm saying that's not what get things done. That's not being a decent person.
It's clearly he's going to be a lot more productive than the last guy, right? It's going to be a much more successful 2 years than Trump's first 2 years. There's no doubt about that.
No, my point is he's executing things in a way that gets his vision rolled out way quicker than anybody who didn't spend 8 years in the White House watching Barack Obama could ever.
Yeah. So he's like both like a decent human being and well qualified for the job. It's like a great combination, then much better than the opposite, right?
Yeah, my point is, Donald Trump is now a version of he's got the same power. If you take,
ever since the coup, right? Like it's a completely open question where things are going to go. Like I'm so happy that didn't carry out. I think of Canada as being a lot more, I think like a little less vulnerable to like that type of action, right? Like just the system is sort of more stabilized and self-correcting than the U.S. is. Like they were on the brink of martial law. Like if they'd gotten a hold of of those Congress people, and then those 2 pipe bombs went off, that would have been it, right? Tick tick, boom.
Yeah, the problem with that, this is fading in the rearview mirror, just at a speed I never would have thought it could. But it is.
How is it fading though? Like you think people are forgiving it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. For sure.
Oh my God! What about all the people the FBI are arresting? They're not going to get forgiven. There's hundreds of them. Like it's going to go on and on and on and on. It's going to become like one of the largest legal prosecutions in American history. They're not going to go away.
It's not going to affect It's not going to affect Trump. It's not going to affect any of his supporters. It's not going to affect.
He has lots of assets people can go after. Right, like he's not invulnerable. If he's just by himself, then he's like a lot tougher. But he's got lots of assets, and there's like family involved and stuff, right? Like, are you telling me no one in the Trump family is ever going to be convicted of anything ever?
I'm not telling you that. They might be, but my point is not that. My point is that because Donald Trump, whatever you want to say of them, you can watch 20-year-old episodes of him on the Charlie Rose Show if they still have that, and he's the exact same person with the exact same grievances in the world.
He's way more lucid 20 years ago than today. There's no doubt about that. He's not the same guy at all. He's like
he's sharper and he's sharper and better and less, I don't know, bombastic, let's say. But my point is,
he just seems like he's living in a reality bubble, right? Like it's like confident leaders don't need to imagine this whole world of things that aren't true. They don't need their ego constantly fed. It's so, you know what I mean? Like there's just so many stupid stories. Like when you actually go, and then there's been so much, it's like when you start going through shit, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Cause it seems like a million years ago, cause there's been so much craziness in between.
That's not my point. My point is that if you watch him, he understands all the problem points. He understands what were the barriers of being president and not being able to deploy what he wanted.
So you want to go double or nothing on that case of beer for Trump in 2024? I'm going double or
nothing 24. Yeah, for sure. This far out, it's not even. That's the only thing. Okay, wait, don't worry about that. So let's do summary and then wrap it up because it's been so in summary, just as it relates to cannabis, you've got cannabis, you've got a lot of stores, you have legal growing options, right? Mm-hmm. You have a variety of different strengths, you have a variety of different experiences, right? The best course of action, if you're interested in any of these experiences, is to go to the local store and start chatting up whoever is there about what you might like or not
Maybe
like.
you look on Google and see which ones have the best reviews, right? Look at what they have in stock. Maybe you look up a couple strains. It's not the worst idea, right? Any product they list, if you Google that strain, you can get information out of websites like Leafly is one. There's a bunch of others, but they basically it's like any strain you can learn about it. Ideally, you have some idea of what you want before you go in, right? The other thing, actually, I didn't mention, which is really, really cool, because there are all these terpene profiles we're talking about. I don't know if you remember the Transformers, right? And they had the little baseball cards, and then they had like power ratings for the different Transformers, so that you could kind of compare them, right? Like they have different power or whatever. I don't even remember what the ratings were, but just that they had them, right? So they had this same concept for cannabis, but the graphics are like a circle graphic, like so multiple line charts. It kind of looks like if you're familiar with the website Simply Wall Street, when they do the company profiles, they have like health and future and I can't remember what the other ones are, but that sort of thing. So with the terpenes, it's the same idea. So then you can take like two strains where the names may have nothing in common, and just at a glance by seeing these little charts, go, oh, these two are really similar. Right? Oh, those two are like, you're going to see which ones are similar and different. And so like, oh, if I like this one with this profile, I'll probably like this one with the same kind of profile. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no,
so
it makes
it's like,
perfect
it's
sense.
a square, it's like a line grid, and then the circle, it makes like a star shape the way that the points are. And then how far it goes out is like sort of how intense that part of it is. And then when you have, then it basically takes a bunch of like sort of random strain names and actually gives you something cohesive that you can look at. Because, just saying it has a THC potency that's the same. It's like the way that you can have like two vodkas, like a vodka and a rum that are both 40%, is like, it's not really the same thing in cannabis. There's like a lot more to it.
Yeah. Okay. Right. And then so the best. I'm just going through the best way to get started. So then the best way is not to use edibles. Is to use sort of smoking controlled.
I would say so. If you've never, I know, like if you've never ever smoked and never ever want to smoke, then don't smoke. Nothing wrong with that. Right? Then edibles, or they have drinks and stuff too. Like there's other options, right? But it's all the same kind of concept of like absorbing a few milligrams and deciding if you like it. But I think for me, the smoking experience is much sort of clearer and better and easier to understand. Most people, though, it's like the first time they get high, they don't notice it. It's a really weird phenomenon, actually. I've never really seen it kind of properly quantified. But it's sort of like they get high but don't realize they're high. And it's almost like you have to do it twice. But the second time, it's like you feel it right away. But the first time, it's almost like you're not used to it, so you don't notice it, if that makes sense. That's a common anecdote of lots of people I know.
Okay, so then the last question is, what do you outside of the field of cannabis, what do you think needs more attention to in the world right now?
In the world, climate change.
Okay.
Right? I want that, and I think that you need it. Like, do we actually need billionaires? Like I think redistribution of wealth is pretty high on my list too. Again, that's why like with like Biden bringing in like giant wealth taxes, I'm very, very much in favor of like that type of thing. Anything that can make rich people get taxed more there can leave room to get rich people taxed more here as well. So it's like it's beneficial to us when they raise their tax rates.
Well, the issue is that what you call a billionaire is somebody who owns, or what, not you, but what people call a billionaire is someone who has $1 billion of property, right?
Sometimes they have the cash.
Yeah, but mostly not, because there's no reason to put $1 billion in the bank. You have to pay insurance on that, right?
Well, no, if it's like, but it's like liquid assets then, if not, cash per se, right? Versus like shit that's hard to sell, like, I don't know, baseball cards.
Right, but the reaction to whatever you're proposing is going to be to file wealth in whatever categories you won't count as wealth.
If we're on Canada, say, like if we started going after like, tertiary properties, right? That would be a great starting point, right?
One point about the billionaires is that when people say, oh, this person's a billionaire, and you say, well, Elon Musk. Well, the reason why Elon Musk is a billionaire is because he owns several companies that he started. And if you take how much stock he holds in those companies and multiply them by the current share value, you get some astronomical number. That's why.
But he can't actually collect it. I get what you're saying.
He can collect it, but if you make him collect it, he loses control of the company. Right.
Well, yeah, but he'd have all the money to make. I don't know. Like, I think Elon Musk is a super interesting kind of character of our age, right? Like, I definitely enjoy watching the news of the things like Tesla and SpaceX is doing. Starlink, I'm a huge fan of. I would definitely invest in the Starlink IPO were that opportunity presented reasonably.
Yeah, listen, it's very hard because Elon Musk
So, but he's
may.
creating, he's making the world, right? Like he's making all this, but like, so it's like I'm all for Elon, like, setting up on Mars, because like if someone has to be brave enough to take that step. Like here's the thing, right? Would you go to Mars for $1 billion?
I wouldn't, but
No, me neither. It took you like 1 second to decide. Okay, would you go to Mars for $1 billion and it would cure climate change? But you have to go forever. So there would be no climate crisis. The problem would be instantly solved. But you have to go to Mars and can't come back. Would you go?
that's a difficult question. I have young children, so I'm gonna have to pad it out.
Right? It's even that. Okay, here's one more. It kind of ties together, right? What if aliens came down, okay, and they want to take you up in their beautiful ship, just like in that Radiohead song, show you the miracles of the universe. So for 2 weeks, you would travel and just learn everything you could about the cosmos with these aliens. Speed of light wouldn't matter. You'd be all over the place, right? But when you came back, 15 years on Earth would have passed. Would you do it?
No, of course not, because it's a young kid problem again.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that? I bet if you were 8, you'd say yes. It's like you have like the minimal skin in the game. You're like, I got a couple of kids. I don't want to go. I'm not leaving. It's like there's 6 billion people, but you can't go because you love a few of them. It's amazing.
Okay, but here's my point in the whole thing. It's the billionaire attack problem. The point that I have about Elon Musk is Elon Musk may, in the history of the world, literally be credited for saving humans. Like there could be 10 years, a colony on Mars, something catastrophic happens on Earth, and you're like, oh, look, this guy saved the human race. So if you want to take, the productivity or the impact of a normal person and the productivity and the impact of this gentleman that could be on the human race, it could be he could be making a galactic contribution, right? It's not impossible.
It's possible we're the first people ever to colonize another planet anywhere in the universe. That's entirely possible. It doesn't seem likely, but it doesn't seem impossible at all.
I find it very difficult to rate how much money he should receive, because it seems to me his contribution could be 1,000,000 times an incomparable amount to a normal person.
Well, it's more about power than money at a certain level, right?
It's not. It's about the fact that he has these investments which are worth money, okay? And because he's now you sound like a Marxist, because he controls capital. And because he controls the capital and he has a reputation of controlling capital, people feel comfortable giving him their money to invest, and it becomes a feed forward prophecy. So that I get.
Well, there's also like a cult following too, right? Like it's not his rise to stardom isn't just sort of like pure economics 101. There's a whole like internet celebrity fame with it too, right? It's a combination. He's as much a cultural figure as he is like a financial figure.
Now he is, but not initially. Now, initially he made his money on PayPal, and it was just a bunch of smart kids that could.
So it's a paradox, right? Like on one hand, I definitely think there's a huge issue of wealth inequality that needs to be resolved. On the other hand, I do kind of like Elon Musk.
No, I listen. This has been my primary problem with the attack on these characters. Is I keep going. So, which super wealthy character do you have a problem with? Is it Bill Gates that's giving a lot of his money away? Is it Warren Buffett that's giving a lot of money away?
How most of the billionaires people can't name them. You know what I mean? I bet most people can't name 10.
Is there anything that you want to promote? Any contact information? How do people get in touch with your endeavors?
Oh, I guess, like, I'm not really here to sell anything per se, but follow my adventures on Burlington 420, at Burlington 420 on Twitter, and, just try to be a good, decent contributor to a positive cannabis culture and be kind to everybody. There's not, like, but just be positive about it, right? Like, this is a good thing, right? Like, prohibition was immoral because it was rooted in racism. It is so much better that we're moving down this path, and it will be better still when this sort of global green wave crashes around the world and there's more fun places that we can go to and you can take a vacation and have some weed while you're on vacation. I think that would be great.
Perfect, Eric. And thanks for coming on the show.
Cheers. Take it easy, Greg.